My name is Audrey. I am 32 years old, and on the night of my birthday, my brother slapped me across the face to steal a $300,000 check our grandfather gave me. I stood against the hallway wall of our family mansion, my cheek burning while his wife laughed at my pain. He held up his phone, threatening to call the police and frame me for elder abuse if I did not hand over the money immediately. He thought I was just a powerless data entry clerk who would submit to his demands. He had no idea he had just assaulted a senior federal investigator, and that check was a ticket to prison. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to fight back against a toxic family who thought you were weak and defenseless. Growing up in a massive estate in Connecticut meant maintaining a perfect facade at all times. My parents, Richard and Catherine, cared only about appearances and social status above all else. They worshipped my older brother Gavin, treating him like a business prodigy from a young age, while dismissing me entirely as an afterthought. Tonight was my 32nd birthday dinner, but you would never know it by looking at the dining room table. Gavin dominated the entire conversation, loudly boasting about his latest tech startup venture. He claimed he was on the verge of revolutionizing the fitness industry, gesturing wildly with his expensive crystal wine glass. My parents nodded along with absolute devotion, completely ignoring the fact that my birthday cake sat untouched on the wooden sideboard. I sat quietly at the far end of the long table in my simple gray sweater, keeping my head down and avoiding eye contact. They all assumed I was just a low-level data clerk struggling to pay the monthly rent for my small downtown apartment. I let them believe that false narrative. I never mentioned my actual career to anyone in this house. The only person at the table who truly saw me for who I was happened to be Grandpa Theodore. At 85 years old, he sat quietly observing the ridiculous charade my family put on. After dinner wrapped up and the plates were cleared, Grandpa Theodore tapped my arm gently under the table. He pressed a tightly folded piece of paper into my palm. His eyes met mine, carrying a strange and heavy sense of urgency. "Keep this safe," he whispered, speaking so quietly that the others could not hear him over Gavin talking. "Do not let them see it under any circumstances." I slipped the paper deep into my pocket, but as I pulled my hand away, I caught Gavin staring directly at me from across the room. His eyes narrowed sharply, tracking the movement of my hand with intense suspicion. 10 minutes later, I excused myself from the table to use the restroom. As I walked down the long, dimly lit hallway toward the back of the massive mansion, heavy footsteps echoed loudly behind me on the hardwood floor. Before I could even turn around to see who it was, a strong hand grabbed my shoulder and shoved me hard into the wall. It was Gavin. His face was flushed red with expensive wine and pure, unadulterated anger. "What did the old man just give you?" he demanded, stepping closer and blocking my path forward. "It is absolutely none of your business," I replied, trying to push past his broad shoulders. He slammed his hand against the wall right next to my head, effectively trapping me in place. "I saw him hand you a check, Audrey. Hand it over right now. My startup is going through a critical cash flow transition, and I need that capital immediately to keep operations running smoothly." I pulled the folded check from my pocket and glanced at it for the very first time. The amount written in blue ink was completely staggering. $300,000. I gasped softly, but Gavin immediately snatched at the paper. I yanked my hand back just in time to avoid his grasp. "No, Gavin. Grandpa gave this money to me. You are drowning in massive debt and everyone in the industry knows it. I am not funding your fake luxury lifestyle anymore." The words barely left my mouth before his large hand flew through the air. The harsh slap echoed sharply in the narrow hallway. My head cracked painfully against the dark wood paneling, and a blinding hot pain shot straight through my left cheek. I tasted fresh metallic blood on the inside of my mouth. I slumped down against the wall, clutching the valuable check tightly to my chest. Right at that exact moment, the heavy door to the main drawing room opened. Nia, Gavin's glamorous wife, stepped gracefully into the hallway. She adjusted her expensive designer dress, her beautiful dark skin glowing warmly under the bright crystal wall sconces. She looked down at me, slumping against the wall, then looked up at Gavin. Instead of showing any horror or concern, a cruel and mocking laugh escaped her lips. "Honestly, Audrey, you should be grateful," Nia sneered, crossing her arms over her chest. "Gavin is doing you a massive favor tonight. What would a basic clerk like you even do with that kind of money anyway? You would probably just waste it all on cheap clothes and frozen dinners. Let a real businessman manage your finances so it does not go to waste." "You are both completely delusional," I managed to say. Gavin raised his phone, threatening to call the police regarding elder financial abuse. I did not argue. I kicked his shin hard, shoved past Nia, and sprinted outside to my car. I drove straight toward the city bank. That check was my freedom and their absolute ruin. I smiled through the pain and kept driving. The bright lights of the downtown branch blinded me as I pushed through the heavy double doors. My heart hammered aggressively against my ribs, matching the frantic pulse of my cheek where Gavin had struck me just 20 minutes ago. The lobby was nearly empty at this late hour, occupied only by a lone security guard and a single teller counting cash behind the reinforced glass. I walked directly past the velvet ropes and headed straight for the private office of the branch manager, Arthur Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell had managed the sprawling financial portfolios of my family for nearly 3 decades. He knew my parents, he knew Gavin, and he most importantly knew my grandfather. I knocked twice on his door and pushed it open without waiting for an invitation. "Audrey," he said, looking up from his dual computer monitors, with a polite but deeply confused smile. "What brings you here so close to closing time? Goodness, your face. What happened to you?" I ignored his question and slid the tightly folded paper across his polished mahogany desk. "Grandpa Theodore gave this to me tonight," I said, keeping my voice perfectly steady despite the wild adrenaline surging through my veins. "He told me to keep it safe. I need you to verify the account routing numbers and process it immediately." Mr. Mitchell frowned slightly, clearly sensing the intense urgency radiating from me. He picked up the check, unfolded it carefully, and adjusted his silver reading glasses. $300,000, he murmured, his eyebrows shooting up toward his hairline in genuine shock. "This is a highly unusual amount for a birthday gift, Audrey. Let me pull up Theodore's primary trust account and verify the available liquidity before we proceed." I stood perfectly still in front of his desk, my arms crossed tightly over my chest, watching his fingers fly across the mechanical keyboard. The silence in the office stretched out, broken only by the rapid clicking of the keys. Then the clicking abruptly stopped. I watched as the warm, polite demeanor completely vanished from Mr. Mitchell's face. The color drained from his cheeks so rapidly that his skin took on a sickly, ashen hue. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. He stared at the glowing computer screen as if he were looking at a live explosive device. "Mr. Mitchell," I asked, stepping closer to the edge of the desk, "is there a problem with the routing number?" He did not answer me. Instead, he shot up from his leather executive chair, practically knocking it backward against the wall. He rushed past me, grabbed the brass handle of his office door, and locked it with a sharp, heavy click. He twisted the window blinds shut, plunging the small office into shadows. "Call the police right now," he whispered, his voice trembling with absolute terror. "Do not use your cellular phone. Use my secure landline. Dial 911 immediately." I stood my ground, narrowing my eyes at him. "I am not calling anyone until you tell me exactly what you see on that screen." "This check is not from your grandfather's personal trust, Audrey," he stammered, pointing a violently shaking finger at the monitor. "It is not from his business accounts either. The routing number printed on this check is flagged in our global banking system with a Level 1 federal freeze. This account is registered to a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands. It is currently under active investigation by the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the IRS for massive international money laundering." I moved behind his desk and looked at the screen myself. There it was, in stark black and white. The account holder name was not Gavin. It was not Nia. The primary account holder listed on the frozen offshore account was Audrey. My own brother had secretly used my social security number, my forged signature, and my identity to open a fraudulent offshore bank account. He had been funneling millions of dollars of dirty cartel money through a shell company with my name plastered all over it. If the federal government cracked down on the laundering operation, Gavin would walk away completely clean, and I would spend the rest of my life in a federal penitentiary. The truth hit me hard. Grandpa Theodore had not given me this check as a birthday gift. He had discovered Gavin's illegal checkbook hidden somewhere in the mansion. Grandpa knew Gavin was framing me. He knew my life was in terrible danger. He slipped me the check under the dinner table as a silent, desperate warning to run. Audrey, you have to listen to me, Mr. Mitchell pleaded, backing away from the computer as if it might burn him. If you try to cash this, you will be flagged as an active fugitive attempting to move illicit funds. We need to alert the authorities that your identity has been compromised before the federal agents trace this check back to you. I did not panic. I did not cry. A cold, hard clarity settled over my mind. Gavin thought he had orchestrated the perfect crime. He thought he could use his quiet, unassuming sister as the ultimate scapegoat for his massive financial sins. I reached out and calmly plucked the check from Mr. Mitchell's trembling hands. I tucked it safely back into my pocket. "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Mitchell," I said softly, "but I handle my own problems." Before Mr. Mitchell could argue, the piercing wail of police sirens shattered the quiet night outside. Flashing red and blue lights illuminated the drawn blinds of the office. "They are here!" Mr. Mitchell gasped in relief. The sirens grew deafeningly loud. Heavy boots pounded against the bank lobby floor. But they were not here to help me. A loud voice echoed through the bank. "Audrey, step out with your hands up. We have a warrant for your arrest for felony theft and elder abuse." Gavin had made good on his threat. The metal table pressed against my wrists. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Through the walls, I could hear my parents in the lobby. They were not here to help me. They were giving a theatrical performance for anyone who listened. "She has always been disturbed," my mother proclaimed to a desk sergeant. "A liar with a terrible gambling problem. We tried to get her psychiatric help, but she refused. We are heartbroken she would steal from her dying grandfather." My father Richard chimed in, backing up her lies. "Gavin is the victim here. He manages the family finances perfectly." Audrey broke into the safe out of spite. "Please make sure she faces the maximum penalty. We will not be posting bail for a thief." I let their betrayal wash over me. Earlier, it might have broken my heart. Now it just fueled my resolve. The door swung open. Detective Miller walked in carrying a folder. He threw my grandfather's check onto the table. He sat down with a look of disgust on his face. $300,000, Miller said with contempt. "Your brother reported you. He provided statements showing you drained a vulnerable man of his life savings. We have you dead to rights. You assaulted Gavin and fled the scene. You are looking at 15 years in a penitentiary." I looked at the check, then met his eyes. I did not cry. I did not panic. I sat up straight and dropped the mousy clerk persona to become the senior federal agent I actually was. "Unlock my cuffs, Detective Miller," I said, my voice commanding and steady. He let out a laugh and shook his head. "You are in no position to give orders, lady. You are going to a holding cell." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. "My name is Audrey Preston, badge number 8492. I am an investigator for the Internal Revenue Service specializing in offshore tax evasion. I suggest you unlock these cuffs and hand me your laptop before you embarrass yourself." Miller stopped laughing. His eyes narrowed as he tried to read my expression. He saw no fear in my gaze. He hesitated before pulling a small silver key from his belt. He unlocked my wrists, rubbing his neck. He slid his laptop across the table toward me. I pulled the keyboard close. My fingers flew across the keys. I bypassed his local precinct network and logged directly into the secure encrypted federal IRS portal, using my multi-factor authentication credentials. The screen turned dark blue, displaying the official government seal. I pulled up the exact routing number printed on the check he had just slammed down. I turned the heavy laptop around so it faced him directly. Read the primary account holder name, Detective, I instructed firmly. Miller leaned in close to the glowing screen. His eyes widened drastically. "It says Gavin Preston, but this account is flagged heavily. It says it is currently frozen under a federal warrant for illicit money laundering." "Exactly," I said, leaning back in my chair. "My brother is running a massive illegal shell company out of the Cayman Islands. He is laundering millions of dollars for a highly dangerous organized crime syndicate. He put my name as a secondary signer on that specific account without my knowledge, hoping to frame me when the feds finally closed in. My grandfather found out and gave me that checkbook tonight as a silent warning. The only reason Gavin called you is because he panicked completely. He needed me locked up and discredited before I could figure out what he was actually doing." Detective Miller went completely pale. The aggressive, tough cop routine vanished instantly. He looked from the screen to me and then back to the screen. He realized he had just aggressively interrogated a senior federal agent who held significantly more jurisdiction than a local city detective. "Agent Preston, I am incredibly sorry," he stammered, closing the folder quickly. "I had absolutely no idea. Your brother filed a sworn affidavit." He played the concerned citizen perfectly. "I will send a squad car to your family estate right now. We can arrest Gavin Preston for filing a false police report, perjury, and attempted fraud immediately." I held up my hand, stopping him in his tracks. "No, you will not touch him." Miller looked deeply confused. "He just set you up to take the fall for a massive federal crime. Why would you let him walk away tonight?" "Because arresting him for a simple false police report is a slap on the wrist," I explained, my voice cold and precise. "He is not acting alone. His wife Nia is deeply involved, and they are tied to a much larger criminal network. If you arrest him tonight, they will lawyer up and hide the rest of the stolen money. I want to catch them in their entire web of fraud. I want to burn his fake empire to the ground and recover every single cent they stole from innocent people." "What do you need me to do?" Miller asked instantly, shifting from an interrogator to a willing subordinate. "You are going to process me exactly like a common criminal," I instructed. "You will formally charge me and set my bail at $50,000. Then you will record in the system that a mysterious anonymous benefactor paid my bail in cash. My family needs to believe I am absolutely terrified, broke, and running out of options. They need to think their trap worked perfectly." Miller nodded slowly, a respectful smile forming on his face. He closed the laptop and stood up. "You got it, Agent Preston. We will make it look incredibly convincing." I stood up, smoothing out my gray sweater. Gavin and my parents thought they had destroyed my life tonight, but they had no idea that releasing me back into the wild was the biggest mistake they could possibly make. The hunt was officially on. I pushed open the heavy oak doors of our sprawling family estate, my $50,000 bail receipt folded neatly in the front pocket of my jacket. The crisp morning air felt sharp against my face, providing a stark contrast to the stale atmosphere inside the police precinct. Detective Miller had played his part flawlessly. He processed my temporary release with cold professionalism while ensuring the official public record showed only a desperate broke woman bailed out by a nameless charity. Now I needed to play my part to perfection. I kept my shoulders slumped and my gaze lowered toward the marble floor as I stepped into the grand foyer, projecting the exact image of defeat my family expected to see. I walked toward the marble staircase leading up to my childhood bedroom. I just wanted to grab my files, gather my belongings, and leave this toxic environment forever. But my path was instantly blocked. My parents, Richard and Catherine, stood halfway up the grand staircase like sentinels guarding a fortress. The face of Catherine was twisted into an ugly mask of disgust, her makeup doing nothing to hide the hatred in her eyes. Her knuckles were white as she gripped the ornate wooden banister with intensity. "You have an unbelievable amount of nerve showing your face in this house again," she screamed, her shrill voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "Getting arrested like a street criminal on the night of your birthday dinner. You are a disgrace to the Preston family name. I cannot believe I ever raised such an ungrateful daughter." I paused at the bottom of the steps, looking up at the two people who were supposed to love and protect me. "I came to pack my belongings," I said, keeping my tone hollow and subdued. "I will be out of your way in 20 minutes. You will not be packing anything, Richard boomed, stepping forward to stand shoulder to shoulder with his wife. He reached behind and hauled a massive trash bag over the railing. He hurled it down the stairs with vicious force. The heavy plastic bag tumbled down the marble steps, bursting open when it hit the foyer floor. My gray sweaters, my work shoes, and my childhood photo albums spilled out in a pathetic pile at my feet. "We already cleared out your miserable room, tossing your pathetic belongings aside," Richard sneered, looking down at me with contempt. "We cannot risk having a convicted felon lingering around our property. What would our friends at the country club think if they knew you were here?" "Gavin called us from the precinct lobby late last night. He told us how you assaulted him in the hallway and then tried to steal a $300,000 check from your grandfather. You are sick, Audrey. You are greedy, jealous, and mentally unstable." "You are taking the word of Gavin over mine," I asked, letting a tremor enter my voice to feed their egos. "After everything you both already know about his mounting debts, his unpaid creditors, and his endless string of failed business ventures." "Do not dare to speak about your remarkable brother that way," Catherine shrieked, taking a menacing step down the stairs toward me. "Gavin is a brilliant entrepreneur with extraordinary vision. He is the true pride and joy of this entire family, a shining example of perfection. He is building an incredible financial legacy while you are currently facing 15 long years in a federal penitentiary for fraud. You are just desperately jealous of his extraordinary success because you have amounted to absolutely nothing in your miserable life." Richard puffed out his broad chest, his face flushed bright red with arrogant, misguided pride. "Gavin is currently so incredibly successful that I just made the absolute best financial decision of my entire adult life. I decided to fully back his new fitness technology expansion project." He reached inside his tailored, expensive suit jacket and proudly pulled out a thick, heavy stack of freshly stapled legal documents. He waved the thick paper contract in the air like a winning lottery ticket, completely oblivious to the trap he had stepped into. "I just proudly co-signed a massive multi-million-dollar commercial bank loan for your brother. I confidently used this entire sprawling estate, all our combined liquid financial assets, and the private personal trust fund of your mother as the primary collateral to secure the capital. We are going to be richer than we ever dreamed possible, and you will not see a single solitary cent of it, you pathetic little thief." I stood perfectly still and stared directly at the thick stack of legal papers waving carelessly in the hand of my father. My trained investigator eyes zeroed in on the bold black letterhead printed at the very top of the formal loan contract: Apex Global Financial Solutions. My heart performed a heavy thud against my ribs as the chilling reality washed over me. Apex Global was not a legitimate commercial bank. They were not a regulated lending institution. They were a notorious, extremely dangerous front operation for the exact same ruthless cartel syndicate that my brother Gavin was currently laundering money for. Gavin had not just secured a massive business loan to fund a fake startup company. He had deliberately and maliciously tricked his own gullible parents into legally signing over all their generational wealth and their beloved family home directly to violent organized criminals. If Gavin ultimately defaulted on that massive, impossible loan, the cartel would not bother sending polite collection letters or taking them to civil court. They would simply arrive without warning in the dead of night, violently take the lucrative property by brutal force, and silence the original owners permanently forever. My foolish parents stood on the grand marble staircase smiling down at me, genuinely believing they were finally securing their golden, glorious, untouchable family legacy. They did not realize they had just eagerly signed their very own brutal death warrant. I did not utter a single word of warning to my parents. They stood on the grand marble staircase, their faces flushed with arrogant pride, completely oblivious to the fatal trap they had just triggered. I simply stepped over the ruptured plastic trash bag, spilling my clothes across the foyer floor, and walked straight toward the heavy mahogany front doors. Let them celebrate their catastrophic financial decision. Let them toast to Gavin and his brilliant business acumen. My focus remained entirely on building the federal case that would dismantle their entire fake empire and protect the innocent people they were stepping on. I reached out to grasp the brass door handle, but a slender arm shot out and slammed flat against the dark wood, physically barring my exit. Naya stepped directly into my path, effectively trapping me in the entryway. She smelled of expensive imported perfume and celebratory champagne, her posture radiating the toxic entitlement that infected everyone in this house. She wore a stunning crimson silk gown that hugged her figure perfectly, but it was the blinding sparkle resting against her collarbone that immediately caught my trained eye. She sported a massive, intricately cut diamond necklace, its heavy platinum setting catching the ambient light from the crystal chandeliers overhead and throwing fractured rainbows across the dark wood paneling. Going somewhere so soon, Audrey mocked, tilting her head to look down at me with absolute disdain. Her gaze traveled deliberately from my messy hair down to my scuffed, inexpensive canvas sneakers. You really are a pathetic sight. Arrested like a common street thug on your own birthday, humiliated in front of the entire family, and now kicked out onto the curb where you belong. You should be completely ashamed of yourself. But then again, a basic clerk like you never possessed an ounce of actual dignity. I kept my expression entirely neutral, refusing to give her the emotional reaction she desperately craved. Move out of my way, Nia. I am leaving. She laughed, a high musical sound that grated against my eardrums like shattered glass. She did not budge an inch. I do not take orders from a disgraced criminal, she sneered, running a manicured hand down the side of her silk gown. You need to learn your place. Look at you wearing cheap rags and carrying your life in a garbage bag, while real success happens right in front of your face. My luxury lifestyle brand just secured a massive multi-million-dollar commitment from a premier international investor. Gavin and I are ascending to a level of wealth and global influence you cannot even begin to comprehend. We are untouchable. You are just a sad, jealous failure who tried to steal from an old man to pay your rent. My eyes remained locked on the blinding jewelry resting against her chest. While Nia rambled about her fake lifestyle brand and her anonymous international investors, my mind rapidly processed the visual data in front of me. I knew exactly who those international investors were. They were the exact same cartel operatives using Gavin to wash their illicit cash. But my professional attention shifted entirely to the specific antique cut of the center diamond on her necklace. It was a flawless cushion-cut sapphire, surrounded by a halo of exceptionally rare pink diamonds. It was not just an expensive piece of jewelry. It was a very specific piece of family history. You certainly seem to enjoy flaunting your newfound wealth, I said smoothly, stepping an inch closer to her. But you should really be more careful about the specific merchandise you choose to display in public. That is a gorgeous vintage Cartier piece. Nia smirked, her hand flying up to brush proudly against the heavy jewels. I am glad your impoverished eyes can at least recognize genuine quality. My new investors presented this to me tonight as a token of our incredibly lucrative partnership. It is an exclusive bespoke creation made just for me. It is absolutely not a bespoke creation, I fired back, my voice dropping to a sharp clinical tone that completely wiped the smug smile off her beautiful face. That specific necklace was commissioned in 1972. It features a highly distinct platinum clasp mechanism designed specifically for the original owner. If you turn your neck slightly to the left, I can clearly see the tiny customized serial number engraved directly beneath the primary latch. Nia stiffened her hand, dropping defensively from her chest. What are you talking about? She snapped, her voice losing its musical quality and taking on a sharp edge of genuine alarm. I stepped right into her personal space, forcing her to look me directly in the eyes. I am talking about the serial number 04829. I am talking about the exact piece of custom jewelry that was violently stolen from the private safe of my grandmother 10 years ago. Grandpa Theodore spent a small fortune hiring private investigators to track down that specific family heirloom after the robbery. The police never found the culprit because the thief lived inside this very house. Gavin did not just accept a gift from a wealthy foreign investor tonight. He pulled that necklace out of whatever dark hole he fenced it in a decade ago and gave it to his clueless wife to wear like a shiny trophy. You are currently wearing stolen property tied directly to a major unsolved grand larceny case. A flash of raw, unfiltered panic erupted across the face of Nia. Her dark eyes widened in absolute terror, and she instinctively slapped her hand over the diamond clasp, desperately trying to hide the engraved serial number I had just accurately identified. She knew I was right. Her entire body went rigid as she processed the legal implications of proudly wearing a stolen family heirloom right in front of the person who could easily identify it. She looked frantically toward the grand staircase, checking to see if Richard or Catherine had overheard my rapid-fire accusation. They were still upstairs loudly celebrating their fatal loan agreement, completely ignorant to the tension building by the front door. Nia turned back to me. The panic in her eyes quickly hardened into something entirely malicious. The fear vanished, replaced by a sick, twisted cruelty that perfectly matched the darkness inside my brother. She let out a low, breathless chuckle, her perfectly painted lips curling into a wicked sneer. She pressed her spine harder against the heavy mahogany wood. "You always think you are so incredibly smart, Audrey," she hissed, using her body weight to ensure I could not reach the brass handle. "You think you have all the answers. But you are completely powerless. You cannot prove anything about this necklace, and even if you could, it does not matter anymore. Because the only person who actually cared about your miserable existence is currently fighting for his life." My heart slammed violently against my ribs. A cold dread pooled in my stomach. "What did you just say?" Nia smiled maliciously, her eyes gleaming with dark, sadistic satisfaction. "Oh, did nobody tell you the tragic news? Your precious Grandpa Theodore just collapsed in the main dining room. He suffered a massive cardiac event right after the police dragged you away in handcuffs. The paramedics just rushed him to the emergency room at City General Hospital. He is likely taking his last breaths right now." "Move!" I commanded, my voice trembling with a sudden, overwhelming surge of panic. I shoved my shoulder against her, desperate to reach the door handle and get to the hospital. She shoved me back hard, planting her feet and blocking the exit completely. "I do not think so," she whispered, her sick smile widening as she watched the terror wash over my face. "You are going to stay right here and watch us celebrate while your only ally in this world dies completely alone." I rammed my shoulder hard into Nia's chest, throwing her off balance. She shrieked, stumbling backward against the mahogany console table as I tore the heavy front door open and sprinted into the frigid night air. I did not look back. I threw myself into the driver's seat of my sedan, slammed the car into gear, and sped down the winding driveway of the estate. The tires squealed violently as I took the sharp corner onto the main road, heading straight towards City General Hospital. My mind raced faster than the engine. Grandpa Theodore was the only person in that sprawling, poisonous family who actually loved me, and now he was dying. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned entirely white. I shattered every speed limit in the county, weaving recklessly through the sparse late-night traffic. I abandoned my car in the emergency loading zone, ignoring the shouts of a parking attendant, and ran through the sliding glass doors. The harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital lobby burned my eyes as I frantically scanned the directory. Intensive care unit, 4th floor. I bypassed the agonizingly slow elevators and threw open the door to the stairwell. I took the concrete steps 2 at a time, my lungs burning with raw exertion, until I crashed through the heavy fire door onto the 4th floor. I sprinted down the pristine white corridor, desperate to reach his room. My frantic momentum came to an abrupt halt. A pair of massive men in tailored black suits stood side by side like stone gargoyles, completely blocking the double doors leading into the cardiac intensive care wing. Private security. I stepped forward, my chest heaving as I tried to catch my breath, but the guards immediately raised their thick arms, forming an impenetrable human barricade. "Move out of my way," I demanded, my voice echoing sharply down the sterile hallway. "My grandfather is in there, and I am going to see him." The heavy doors parted with a soft hiss, and Gavin stepped out into the corridor. He looked perfectly composed, his expensive suit completely unwrinkled, a stark contrast to my disheveled state. He smirked, tapping a thick sheaf of legal papers against his palm. "You are not going anywhere near him, Audrey," he stated, his voice dripping with condescending authority. He held up the papers, making sure the bold legal letterhead was entirely visible. "This is a fully executed notarized medical proxy and durable power of attorney. Grandpa Theodore signed this last year, granting me absolute exclusive control over all his healthcare decisions. You have absolutely zero legal right to step foot inside that room." Right behind Gavin, my parents emerged from the ICU waiting area. Richard and Catherine flanked my brother, forming a united, impenetrable front of familial betrayal. "Your brother is making incredibly difficult decisions tonight," Catherine said, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. "We cannot have you in there causing a scene and making this tragedy all about yourself. You have always been too toxic and emotionally unstable to handle sensitive family matters." "Toxic," I repeated, staring at the woman who gave birth to me. "Your favorite son is currently running an international money laundering syndicate out of the Cayman Islands, and you think I am the toxic one in this family." Richard scoffed loudly, waving a dismissive hand in the air. "We are not listening to your paranoid, jealous delusions tonight, Audrey. Gavin is the undisputed head of this family now, and he knows exactly what is best for Theodore." I turned my furious gaze back to Gavin. "What are you doing to him?" I demanded, stepping as close to the security guards as I physically could. "What kind of medical decisions are you making behind those doors?" Gavin smiled, a cold, reptilian expression that did not reach his dead eyes. "I am doing what a responsible, loving grandson must do," he replied smoothly, adjusting his silk tie. "The medical team informed us that his heart attack was massive. The prognosis is incredibly grim. They could keep him alive on machines, but that would just prolong his inevitable suffering. As his sole medical proxy, I have authorized the attending physicians to immediately cease all life-saving interventions. We are letting nature take its course." A wave of pure, unfiltered horror washed over me, chilling my blood. "You are murdering him," I whispered, the devastating realization hitting me like a physical blow. "You know he found your illegal checkbook. You know he figured out your entire fraudulent offshore operation. He gave me that check to expose you, and the stress of your betrayal triggered his heart attack. You are just finishing the job so he can never testify against you in federal court. You are pulling his life support to protect your dirty money." Gavin leaned forward, his face inches from mine, completely shielded by the wall of muscle provided by his hired thugs. "Prove it," he hissed, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper meant only for my ears. "You are a disgraced clerk who just got arrested for stealing from a dying old man. I am a highly respected tech CEO making a compassionate end-of-life decision for my beloved grandfather. Who do you think the authorities will believe? You have absolutely nothing. Your pathetic life is over." Just as Gavin finished his vile threat, the heavy intensive care unit doors swung open again. The lead cardiologist stepped out into the hallway. The doctor looked absolutely devastated, holding a silver clipboard tightly against his chest. He looked directly at Gavin and let out a heavy, mournful sigh. "We have followed your direct legal orders, Mr. Preston," the doctor said, his voice echoing in the quiet corridor. "We are officially pulling his life support system now." I did not scream or cry out in defeat. I slowly knelt down, reaching toward my left ankle. I pulled a hidden encrypted federal flash drive right from my shoe. I did not hesitate for a single second. I completely ignored the smug, victorious smirk plastered across the face of my brother. I ignored the arrogant, self-righteous scowls of my parents as they stood shoulder to shoulder, silently endorsing the murder of their own patriarch. I spun on my heel and marched straight toward the main cardiac intensive care nurses' station. A young, terrified-looking nurse sat behind the high, curved counter, her hands hovering nervously over her keyboard as she watched the dramatic family standoff unfold in the hallway. "Move," I ordered, my voice leaving absolutely no room for debate or negotiation. I stepped behind the counter and gently but firmly nudged her rolling chair aside. I reached down and inserted the encrypted silver flash drive directly into the secure USB port of the hospital computer terminal. My fingers flew across the keyboard with practiced rapid precision. I easily bypassed the standard hospital network login and accessed the federal secure server partition I had established earlier today at the police precinct. A glaring password prompt appeared on the bright screen. I quickly typed in the 50-character alphanumeric decryption code that Grandpa Theodore and I had memorized together over a year ago for exactly this type of absolute worst-case scenario. The screen flashed bright green. A highly classified PDF document titled Directive Omega opened instantly. I hit the print command and selected the heavy-duty laser printer sitting at the far end of the counter. The machine whirred to life, grinding and clicking as it processed the urgent request. The heavy silence in the hallway was broken only by the rhythmic hum of the printer feeding thick white paper through its hot rollers. "What exactly do you think you are doing, Audrey?" Gavin sneered, stepping away from his wall of private security guards. "Are you printing out your resume? Because I can assure you that absolutely nobody in this city is going to hire a disgraced, arrested IRS clerk who assaults her own family members and steals from the elderly. You have absolutely zero power here." I ignored his pathetic, desperate taunts. I waited until the final page slid out into the output tray. I gathered the warm stack of papers, squared the edges meticulously on the solid countertop, and walked straight back to where Gavin stood. I did not stop or slow my pace when his massive private security guard stepped forward to physically block my path. I raised the thick stack of papers and shoved them violently against the chest of my brother, forcing him to instinctively grab the documents or let them fall to the polished floor. "Read it, Gavin," I commanded, my voice echoing off the sterile white walls with absolute, undeniable authority. "Read every single word of that document before you commit premeditated murder in a hospital hallway." Gavin scoffed arrogantly, adjusting his expensive silk tie before looking down at the papers. His mocking smirk vanished the absolute second his eyes processed the bold federal seal printed clearly at the very top of the first page. "It is an airtight, federally notarized, irrevocable, durable medical power of attorney," I stated loudly, making sure the lead cardiologist and every single nurse in the vicinity heard my words with perfect clarity. Grandpa Theodore secretly signed that exact document with me over a year ago. We executed it in a secure federal building under the direct sworn supervision of 3 federal judges. It explicitly and permanently names me, Audrey Preston, as his sole exclusive medical proxy. Furthermore, it contains a specific ironclad clause that expressly revokes, nullifies, and permanently voids any and all previous or future medical directives produced by Gavin Preston. Your document is completely worthless, Gavin. It is a piece of trash. My parents rushed forward, looking over the shoulder of Gavin to read the glowing federal stamps and the unmistakable bold signature of Grandpa Theodore. Catherine gasped, covering her mouth with her manicured hand. Richard went entirely pale, his eyes darting frantically between the undeniable legal document and my steady, unwavering gaze. "This is impossible," Gavin stammered, his voice cracking as his hands began to shake uncontrollably. He backed away from me, the heavy papers rustling loudly in his trembling grip. "This is a fake. It has to be a sophisticated forgery." I snatched the papers right back out of his hands and shoved them directly toward the lead cardiologist. "Doctor, verify the federal seals and the notary stamps right now," I ordered. The doctor quickly adjusted his glasses and reviewed the first 2 pages. His eyes widened in absolute shock before he let out a massive sigh of profound relief. "These are absolutely authentic," the doctor announced to the entire hallway. "This federal directive completely supersedes the standard state proxy Mr. Preston provided earlier. Miss Preston is the sole authorized decision-maker for this patient." I immediately pointed directly at the heavy double doors of the intensive care unit. "Then get back inside that room, right this exact second," I barked, projecting the full, unyielding weight of my federal authority. "Resume all life-saving measures immediately. Reconnect the ventilators, restart the intravenous medications, and do absolutely everything in your medical power to keep my grandfather alive. Do not stop fighting for him." The doctor gave a sharp, definitive nod and practically sprinted back through the double doors, shouting urgent medical codes to his mobilized team of nurses. Gavin turned purple with absolute unfiltered rage. He gestured frantically to his massive private security guards. "Do not just stand there," Gavin screamed, completely losing his carefully curated corporate composure. "Stop them right now. Block the doors. Remove her from this hospital immediately." The two massive men in tailored suits stepped forward, reaching out to physically grab my arms. But before they could even make contact, the chief of hospital security stepped off the nearby elevator, flanked by 4 heavily armed municipal police officers. The terrified nurse at the desk had clearly called for emergency backup the moment the shouting began. The chief of security pointed a stern finger directly at the hired thugs of my brother. "Step down right now," the security chief ordered, placing his hand firmly on his duty belt. "You have absolutely no legal jurisdiction in this medical facility. The proper legal proxy has been fully established. If you attempt to interfere with the medical staff or touch Miss Preston, you will be arrested for aggravated assault and federal obstruction." The 2 private guards looked at the armed police officers, then looked back at Gavin. They immediately raised their hands in surrender and backed away completely, abandoning their wealthy employer to save themselves. Gavin stood completely frozen, his chest heaving with trapped, impotent rage. His parents stared at him in utter horror, slowly realizing that their golden boy had just been thoroughly defeated by the daughter they had violently cast aside. The silence in the hallway was thick and suffocating. Suddenly, the sharp, shrill ringing of a cell phone pierced the quiet air. Gavin flinched violently. He reached into his suit jacket with a trembling hand and pulled out his phone. He looked at the caller identification on the glowing screen. All the remaining color instantly drained from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost. He answered the call, bringing the phone slowly to his ear without saying a single word. He listened for exactly 10 seconds. His knees buckled slightly, and he had to reach out and grab the hospital wall to keep himself from collapsing onto the polished floor. He lowered the phone, his mouth hanging open in absolute terror. He turned his head slowly and looked at Nia, who was standing frozen next to Catherine. They froze. "The accounts," Gavin whispered, his voice cracking with a terrifying, raw panic that echoed loudly in the quiet corridor. "Every single offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The money of the syndicate is completely gone. 0 balances. We are locked out." Nia let out a strangled gasp, her hands flying up to cover her face. Gavin slowly turned his head back to face me. He glared at me with a mixture of absolute hatred and profound, undeniable fear. He knew exactly who had orchestrated the massive financial freeze. He knew I had just destroyed his entire criminal empire with a few keystrokes on a precinct laptop. The heavy brass doors of the crystal ballroom yielded to my push, unleashing a wave of classical string music and the hum of 500 wealthy socialites. The annual Preston Charity Gala was in full swing. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the sea of designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. Waiters in white gloves circulated with silver trays of champagne. It was a suffocating display of fake smiles and manufactured prestige. I spotted my targets immediately. Richard and Catherine were holding court near the grand stage at the front of the room, soaking in the admiration of their peers. I marched directly across the ballroom floor, ignoring the confused glances darting toward my simple black trench coat. I did not care about their dress code. I had less than 24 hours to stop my parents from losing their lives to a violent cartel. I pushed past a group of city council members and stepped right in front of my father. "Richard, you need to listen to me right now," I demanded, keeping my voice low but urgent. "That commercial loan you signed for Gavin yesterday is a death trap. Apex Global is not a bank. They are a front for the same organized crime syndicate Gavin is currently laundering money for." Richard looked at me as if I were a cockroach that had just crawled onto his polished Italian leather shoes. His face flushed with immediate rage. "How did you get past the door staff?" he hissed, glancing nervously at the wealthy donors standing nearby. "You have lost your mind, Audrey. Gavin warned us you would try something like this. He told us you were having a complete psychological breakdown." "He is lying to you," I pleaded, stepping closer. I froze his offshore accounts yesterday. The cartel is going to call in that loan immediately to cover their massive losses. If you do not legally contest that contract tonight, they will take the estate and they will silence you permanently to tie up loose ends. Catherine slammed her champagne flute down onto a passing waiter's tray. She looked at me with a chilling, dead-eyed calmness. "You are a truly sick, twisted individual," she sneered softly. Gavin was entirely right. You will say absolutely anything to destroy his success because your own life is a miserable failure. But we are not going to let you ruin this beautiful evening. Before I could utter another word of warning, Catherine abruptly turned her back to me. She signaled sharply to the audio technician standing by the soundboard. The classical music faded into silence. The bright spotlights shifted, focusing directly on the center of the grand stage. Catherine glided up the short wooden stairs and grasped the microphone stand, her posture radiating elegant, tragic sorrow. "Ladies and gentlemen," Catherine announced, her voice echoing perfectly through the massive ballroom. "Thank you all for joining us tonight to support our foundation. However, before we proceed with the charity auction, I must address a deeply painful family matter that has unfortunately spilled into public view." A hush fell over the crowd of 500 guests. Every face turned toward the stage. I stood frozen on the floor, suddenly realizing the trap I had walked into. I looked toward the back of the room and saw Gavin and Nia leaning against the mahogany bar. They were both holding glasses of champagne, wearing matching expressions of malicious delight. This was their retaliation for the frozen offshore accounts. They had orchestrated this entire public execution. Many of you know that my beloved father-in-law, Theodore, was rushed to the intensive care unit yesterday. Catherine continued, allowing a single practiced tear to roll down her cheek. What you do not know is the shocking reason behind his sudden heart attack. She paused dramatically, pointing a trembling finger directly at me. The spotlights instantly swung around, blinding me and exposing me to the entire room. Gasps rippled through the crowd as 500 pairs of judgmental eyes locked onto my face. My daughter Audrey broke into her dying grandfather's private safe. Catherine projected her voice thick with manufactured grief and righteous anger. She stole a check for $300,000 to fund a severe, crippling gambling addiction. When Theodore confronted her about the theft, the horrific shock and physical altercation caused his massive cardiac event. The ballroom erupted into a frenzy of shocked whispers and disgusted murmurs. People physically stepped away from me as if I were carrying a contagious disease. I stared at my mother in absolute disbelief. She was weaponizing the tragic condition of her own father-in-law to protect her golden child. She was publicly framing me for the exact crimes Gavin had committed, cementing his lie to destroy my credibility forever. We tried so hard to get her psychiatric help. Richard chimed in, stepping up to the microphone beside his wife and wrapping a supportive arm around her shoulders. But some people simply refused to be saved. We can no longer harbor a thief and an abuser in our family. Effective immediately, Audrey is disowned. She has been stripped of the Preston name and completely cut out of all family trusts. Gavin raised his champagne glass from the back of the room, offering me a mocking, silent toast. He thought he had won. He thought publicly destroying my reputation would discredit my federal authority and protect his fraudulent empire. He thought I would cower in shame and run out the door in tears. "Security," Richard commanded into the microphone, his voice booming with authority. "Please remove this woman from our charity event immediately." 3 massive security guards in dark suits stepped out from the shadows near the kitchen doors. They began marching across the ballroom floor directly toward me, pulling out zip ties to restrain my wrists. The wealthy guests parted like the Red Sea, eager to watch the disgraced daughter get dragged out into the cold night. I refused to be a victim in their twisted theatrical production. I refused to let Gavin win the narrative. I turned toward the nearest catering table, draped in heavy white linen. A terrified waiter stood completely frozen, holding a silver tray loaded with full glasses of deep red vintage wine. I reached out and wrapped my hand firmly around the stem of the largest crystal goblet. The lead security guard lunged toward my shoulder. I swung my arm with vicious, calculated force. I smashed the heavy goblet directly into the center of a massive, towering crystal floral arrangement sitting on the catering table. The impact was deafening. The thick crystal shattered instantly, sending a spectacular shower of glittering glass shards and dark red wine exploding across the white tablecloth and the polished floor. The brutal, violent sound echoed through the entire ballroom, like a gunshot, instantly freezing the security guards in their tracks. 500 wealthy guests gasped in unison, flinching backward as silence slammed back down over the room. I slowly turned to face the stage, ignoring the red wine dripping from my hand, completely commanding the attention of every single person in the room. The sharp, violent sound of shattering crystal froze every single person in the massive ballroom. The three muscular security guards paused mid-stride, their hands hovering uselessly in the air, as dark crimson wine dripped from the edges of the ruined catering table like blood. The absolute shock of the destruction bought me exactly the time I desperately needed. I dropped the broken stem of the goblet onto the floor, the thick glass crunching loudly beneath my heel, and marched straight up the wooden steps of the grand stage. Catherine stood completely paralyzed, her mouth parted in silent horror. She had expected me to cry, to beg for forgiveness, to run away in absolute shame. She had not prepared for this. I stepped directly into her personal space and ripped the microphone right out of her trembling hand. I turned my back to my parents and faced the blinding spotlights looking out over the sea of 500 elite guests. Since my mother is so deeply concerned with financial transparency and the ethical use of charity funds, I announced, my voice booming through the state-of-the-art sound system and echoing off the vaulted ceiling. I think it is only fair we look at the actual verified accounting of this prestigious foundation. Because while you are all standing here in your tailored tuxedos and designer gowns writing massive checks to supposedly save the world, you are actually just funding the fraudulent lifestyle of the woman standing right back there. I pointed a rigid finger straight toward the mahogany bar at the back of the room. The spotlights instantly swiveled, cutting through the dim lighting to illuminate Gavin and Nia. Nia lost her arrogant, victorious smirk immediately. She shrank back against her husband, her eyes darting nervously around the room. Let us talk about Aura Wellness. I continued pacing the length of the stage to command the attention of the entire room. Nia Preston's highly publicized, deeply inspiring lifestyle brand. Many of you in this room are major investors. Mr. Sterling, I see you sitting at table 4. You put in $2 million of seed capital last spring. Mrs. Vance, sitting right next to him, you gave Nia $500,000 just last month to expand her organic skincare line. I paused, letting the heavy silence stretch out, ensuring every single guest was hanging on my next word. Aura Wellness has not produced a single physical product in 18 months. I stated, my voice striking the room like a heavy gavel. It operates at a staggering negative 60% profit margin. The distribution warehouses in New Jersey are completely empty. The Milan photo shoots, the celebrity endorsements, the massive launch parties in Aspen, none of it is paid for by actual business revenue. It is paid for by you. The ballroom erupted into a low, dangerous murmur. The wealthy elite absolutely despise being made into fools. I saw Mr. Sterling stand up abruptly from his table, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple as he glared at the back of the room. I am the former top financial auditor for Preston & Shaw, I projected over the growing noise, leaning into the microphone. I know exactly how to trace illegal shell companies. Yesterday afternoon, I tracked $3 million funneled directly from this exact charity foundation, routed through a blind trust in the Cayman Islands, and deposited straight into the operating account of Aura Wellness. Your generous donations are not feeding hungry children tonight. They are paying off loan sharks and violent cartel loans that Gavin took out to keep the fake vanity project of his wife afloat. Gavin pushed himself off the bar, his face contorted with sheer panic. "Shut off her microphone," he screamed at the audio technician, waving his arms frantically. "She is lying. She is a psychotic, jealous liar." But the crowd was no longer listening to him. The wealthy socialites, previously eager to watch my public downfall, had instantly transformed into an angry, bloodthirsty mob. Investors were shouting across the room. Donors were demanding to see the financial ledgers right this very second. The anger in the room was a palpable heavy wave of fury crashing down on Gavin and Naya. They were backed into a corner. The glamorous illusion was completely shattered. They were going to be audited, federally investigated, and ultimately destroyed by the very people they had scammed. I watched from the stage, a fierce, cold satisfaction settling deep into my bones. The truth was finally out in the open. The golden couple was exposed for the frauds they truly were. But I had severely underestimated the absolute depths of my sister-in-law and her manipulative genius. Nia looked around at the angry faces closing in on them from all sides. She looked at Gavin, whose eyes were wide with pure, unadulterated terror. Then she looked up at me standing victorious on the stage. Her eyes narrowed for a fraction of a second, cold, sharp, and calculating. Suddenly, Nia let out a loud, breathless gasp. Her hands flew up to clutch her chest dramatically. She swayed violently on her high heels, her eyes rolling back into her head. Her knees buckled beneath her heavy silk gown. Gavin shouted, lunging forward with desperate speed. He caught her just before her body hit the polished hardwood floor, cradling her head against his chest. "Naya, wake up! Someone call an ambulance right now!" The angry shouts of the crowd abruptly died in their throats. The righteous fury instantly evaporated, replaced by a sudden jarring wave of shock and intense concern. A prominent cardiologist rushed over from table 7, dropping to his knees beside the collapsed woman. Nia fluttered her eyelashes, her chest heaving as she let out a weak, pathetic sob. She grabbed the lapels of the tuxedo Gavin wore, her knuckles turning stark white. "The baby," she cried out, her voice perfectly pitched to be heard in the dead silence of the terrified ballroom. "Please, Gavin, the stress of this vicious attack. It is too much. I cannot lose our baby." A collective gasp ripped through the audience of 500 guests. Hands flew over mouths in utter shock. The entire psychological dynamic of the room flipped in a single devastating second. They were no longer angry, defrauded investors demanding answers. They were highly protective members of society witnessing a brutal, unprovoked attack on a fragile, innocent pregnant woman. "She is pregnant!" Catherine shrieked from the side of the stage, rushing down the wooden steps to push her way through the crowd toward her daughter-in-law. "Oh my God, Audrey, you have gone entirely too far this time. You are trying to kill your own unborn niece." The crowd turned their faces back toward the stage in unison. The glare they leveled at me was no longer just judgmental or annoyed. It was pure, unadulterated hatred. I was no longer the brave whistleblower exposing massive financial fraud. In their eyes, I was a deranged, jealous monster who had deliberately ambushed a charity gala to stress a pregnant woman into a potential miscarriage. The undeniable financial facts I had just laid out were completely forgotten, instantly buried beneath a towering mountain of manufactured maternal sympathy. The 3 massive security guards who had been frozen by my earlier display of violence with the glass now marched toward the stage with renewed aggressive purpose. The wealthy guests actually cheered them on, demanding that I be arrested, demanding that I be locked away before I could cause any more stress or harm to the expanding Preston family. The massive hands of the security guards clamped onto my shoulders with bruising force. They did not gently escort me from the ballroom. They dragged me backward, my heels skidding across the polished floor, away from the glittering chandeliers and the furious, disgusted glares of the high society elite. I did not fight them. I went entirely limp, allowing them to haul me through the swinging metal doors of the catering kitchen and down a long, harsh concrete service corridor. They shoved me out the heavy steel exit doors, sending me stumbling into the freezing, rain-slicked alleyway behind the hotel. The heavy door slammed shut behind me, the mechanical lock engaging with a loud, definitive click. I stood in the damp, freezing darkness, my breath pluming in the icy air. My black trench coat was splattered with expensive red wine, but my mind had never been sharper. The dramatic fainting spell, the sudden miraculous pregnancy announcement, it was entirely too perfect. It was a brilliantly executed, premeditated theatrical performance designed to instantly manipulate the emotions of a room full of wealthy, image-conscious donors. Gavin was arrogant, greedy, and cruel, but he lacked that specific brand of rapid-fire sociopathic cunning. This was Nia. She was the one pulling the strings. I sprinted to my sedan, throwing myself into the driver's seat and slamming the car into gear. I sped through the sparse late-night traffic, heading straight for the regional headquarters of the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. I flashed my federal badge at the heavily armed night guard, bypassed the metal detectors, and took the elevator down to the secure basement sublevel. The bullpen was entirely empty, bathed in the eerie blue glow of standby monitors. I walked straight to my reinforced terminal, swiped my encrypted access card, and logged directly into the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network database. I bypassed Gavin entirely. I pulled every single financial, medical, and personal record attached to Naya Preston. I started with the pregnancy. If a woman of her immense wealth was expecting a child, there would be undeniable digital footprints. There would be top-tier obstetrician appointments, comprehensive blood panels billed to her premium insurance, and VIP hospital registrations. I ran her medical profiles across every domestic database. Absolutely nothing. Zero prenatal care, zero clinical visits. I pivoted immediately to her personal credit lines, specifically targeting the platinum cards she kept separate from the joint accounts she shared with my brother. I ran a targeted search for the past 30 days, filtering for online purchases. Within 3 minutes, I found the smoking gun. 3 days ago, Nia had made a $400 expedited purchase from a highly discreet novelty website that explicitly specialized in realistic prank materials. The manifest detailed the exact items shipped to her private off-the-books post office box. Fake positive pregnancy tests and a set of customizable artificially generated ultrasound images. There was no baby. She had purchased a biological shield to use as the ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, fueled by pure cold adrenaline. If the pregnancy was a calculated lie, the entire financial structure of the syndicate needed to be re-examined. I initiated a deep-dive forensic audit into the shell companies surrounding Aura Wellness. I completely ignored the surface-level corporate documents that bore the signature of Gavin. I dug into the metadata, tracing the original IP addresses, the encrypted server logs, and the initial seed capital routing numbers that established the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Line by line, the digital camouflage stripped away, revealing a massive hidden financial ledger buried beneath layers of complex offshore trusts. The primary trust was not registered to Gavin. It was registered under the maiden name of Nia. The ledger laid out the entire criminal enterprise with terrifying mathematical precision. Every single illicit transfer, every laundered charity donation, every bribe paid to the cartel loan sharks originated from accounts strictly controlled by her. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. Gavin was not the mastermind. My arrogant golden boy brother was nothing more than a useful, pathetic idiot. Nia had strategically manipulated his insatiable greed and his desperate need for parental approval. She had used his legitimate tech CEO status and our family name as a respectable bulletproof front to run a massive international money laundering syndicate right under his nose. Gavin had signed the papers, but Nia held the keys to the entire kingdom. I scrolled rapidly through the bottom of the encrypted ledger, tracking the real-time flow of capital. The offshore freeze I had initiated yesterday was holding strong, but a new heavily concealed emergency fund had suddenly blinked into existence. Nia had maintained a shadow account completely disconnected from the primary syndicate funds, and it was highly active. My eyes locked onto a massive urgent wire transfer that had cleared just 45 minutes ago, right around the time she was faking her dramatic collapse on the ballroom floor. $2.5 million had been wired directly to an elite international aviation charter company. I cross-referenced the transaction with the Federal Aviation Administration flight manifests. The result flashed on my screen, glowing in harsh white text. A private Gulfstream jet had been chartered out of a small private airstrip on the edge of the city. The scheduled departure time was 11 o'clock tomorrow night. I checked the final destination of the chartered flight. The jet was cleared for a direct non-stop route to Montenegro. It was a jurisdiction that famously maintained absolutely no extradition treaty with the United States. I looked back at the flight manifest. There was only one passenger ticket booked. Nia was not trying to save the syndicate. She was not trying to save my family. She was taking the last of the emergency cash and fleeing the country, intentionally leaving Gavin behind to take the absolute full weight of the federal indictment, the cartel retaliation, and the total financial collapse. She was going to let my brother rot in a federal penitentiary for the rest of his life while she disappeared into the sunset with millions in stolen charity funds. Tomorrow night, the puppet master was cutting the strings. I had exactly 24 hours to ground that plane. The sky began to lighten, casting a cold gray wash over the city as I powered down my secure terminal. The digital clock on the wall read 6 in the morning. Nia was scheduled to take off in exactly 17 hours. I gathered the freshly printed stack of damning financial ledgers, the receipts for the fake pregnancy materials, and the flight manifests, shoving them into my leather briefcase. I left the underground federal precinct and drove straight toward Fairfield. I had one final agonizing obligation to fulfill before I tore this entire syndicate to the ground. The drive took less than 40 minutes. I turned onto the winding tree-lined driveway of the Preston estate. The sprawling colonial mansion looked exactly the same as it had during my entire childhood, a monument to arrogance and generational wealth. But as I parked my sedan behind my father's luxury vehicle and walked up the wide stone steps, the illusion of untouchable prestige abruptly shattered. Bright yellow and stark white legal notices were taped violently across the heavy oak front doors. Immediate asset seizure. Notice of default. The loan sharks operating through Apex Global did not waste a single second. With the offshore accounts frozen, they were immediately calling in their local collateral. I pushed the heavy front door open. The foyer was dead silent, but I could hear panicked, hushed voices coming from the formal dining room. I walked down the hallway, my heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Richard and Catherine were sitting at the long mahogany table. They were completely disheveled, a stark contrast to their flawless appearance at the charity gala just hours ago. Richard was frantically shouting into his cell phone, demanding to speak to the bank manager. Catherine sat beside him, clutching a cold cup of coffee, staring blankly at a duplicate seizure notice resting on the table. They both froze the second I walked into the room. Richard slammed his phone down. "Get out of my house," he demanded, his voice trembling with exhausted rage. "You have done enough damage, Audrey. Gavin warned us you might come here to gloat." I did not flinch. I walked directly to the head of the table, unlatched my briefcase, and pulled out the thick stack of federal documents. I slammed them down onto the polished wood right in front of them. "I am not here to gloat, Richard. I am here to offer you the only lifeline you have left." I pointed directly at the seizure notice in front of Catherine. "That is not a bank foreclosure. Apex Global is a front for an organized cartel. Gavin used this entire estate, your retirement funds, and the charity foundation as collateral for a massive illegal bridge loan. He lost the money. Now they are coming to collect." Catherine scoffed, her face twisting with bitter denial. "Gavin would never do that. He is a brilliant CEO. You are simply projecting your own financial failures onto him." I pulled the flight manifest and the fake medical receipts from the stack, sliding them directly into her line of sight. "Gavin is not a brilliant CEO. He is a pathetic puppet. Nia is the actual mastermind. She controls the offshore ledger. She bought fake ultrasound pictures online to manipulate you and that entire ballroom last night. Here is the receipt from the novelty website. She is not pregnant. And right now, she is packing her bags. She wired $2.5 million to a private aviation company 3 hours ago. She is boarding a private jet to Montenegro at 11 o'clock tonight, completely abandoning Gavin to take the fall for federal fraud and cartel debt." They stared at the documents. I could see the tiny, terrifying gears turning in their heads as the undeniable truth threatened to break through their delusion. "You have one chance to survive this," I stated, pulling a blank federal affidavit from my jacket pocket. "Sign this sworn statement. Acknowledge that Gavin and Nia operated the charity as a fraudulent shell company. If you cooperate as federal witnesses right now, I can initiate a federal property freeze. I can legally block the cartel from seizing this house. I can put you under protective custody, but you have to sign it and you have to cut Gavin loose." The silence stretched until it felt like the room would crack. Then Richard stood up. His face was dark purple with absolute blinding fury. He raised his arm and violently swept the entire stack of documents off the table. Hundreds of pages of undeniable proof scattered across the floor like falling snow. "You jealous, psychotic liar," Richard roared, stepping into my personal space. "You manufactured every single page of this garbage. You fabricated these documents using your little government job just to destroy your brother. Gavin is fixing this right now. He promised us." Catherine stood up right next to him, her eyes completely devoid of maternal affection. "You will never be half the person Gavin is," she hissed, stepping on the scattered flight manifests. "We will never sign a single piece of paper against our son. We choose Gavin. We will always choose Gavin. Get out of our house and never return." I looked at the two people who brought me into this world feeling absolutely nothing but cold, clinical pity. "You just signed your own death warrants," I replied softly. Before either of them could shout another insult, the distinct heavy crunch of thick tires on gravel echoed through the open windows. I turned my head toward the long driveway. A massive matte black SUV with heavily tinted windows rolled to a stop directly behind my sedan. The doors swung open simultaneously. Two towering, broad-shouldered men wearing sharp, dark suits stepped out into the morning light. They did not look like bank executives. They looked like professional, remorseless violence. They walked with terrifying, synchronized purpose straight up the stone steps of the mansion. The loan sharks had arrived to collect their collateral. I did not stick around to watch the fallout. I walked past the two towering enforcers in their immaculate dark suits, making absolutely no eye contact. My parents' terrified shouts began to echo from the grand foyer as the reality of their blind loyalty crashed down upon them. They had chosen their golden child, and now they were going to pay the ultimate price for his cowardice. I slipped into my sedan, locked the doors, and drove away from the Preston estate for the absolute last time. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat before I even hit the main highway. The caller ID flashed the main line of the intensive care unit. My heart hammered violently against my ribs. I answered the call, and the urgent, clipped voice of the head floor nurse confirmed my deepest fear and my only remaining hope. Theodore was awake, but his vitals were crashing rapidly. He had minutes, maybe less. I slammed my foot on the accelerator, weaving through the morning traffic with reckless desperation. I abandoned my car in the ambulance loading zone and sprinted through the sliding glass doors. I bypassed the front desk, completely flashing my federal badge to wave off security, and hit the ICU wing at a full run. The sterile, mechanical beeping of the life support machines grew louder as I burst into his private room. Grandpa Theodore looked impossibly fragile. The aggressive network of clear tubes and blinking monitors seemed to be the only things keeping him tethered to the bed. But when his sunken eyes locked onto mine, I saw a familiar blazing spark of absolute clarity. He weakly raised a trembling, bruised hand, gesturing for me to come closer. I rushed to his bedside, gripping his cold, paper-thin fingers. "Get your phone out, Audrey." He rasped, his voice barely more than a dry, rattling whisper. "Record me. Right now." I did not hesitate. I pulled my smartphone from my trench coat pocket, switched to the camera application, and hit the red record button, holding the high-definition lens steady on his weathered face. "My name is Theodore Preston," he stated, staring directly into the camera lens, forcing every single ounce of his remaining strength into his words. "I am of sound mind, and this is my dying declaration. I gave my granddaughter Audrey the $300,000 check from my private safe. It was not stolen. I gave it to her voluntarily to fund her federal investigation into my grandson Gavin and his fraudulent charity operations." He paused, coughing violently, a wet, terrible sound that terrified me. I almost lowered the phone to call for help, but he gripped my wrist with sudden, desperate strength, his eyes wide and commanding, forcing me to keep recording. Gavin found the bank transfer receipts. Theodore continued, his breathing shallow and heavily labored. He confronted me in my study 2 nights ago. When I told him I knew everything about the offshore laundering and the cartel loans, he completely lost his mind. He did not just yell, he attacked me. He shoved me into the heavy oak bookshelf, pinned me to the floor, and physically forced my hand to sign a forged amended will that named him as the sole beneficiary of my entire estate. The physical assault triggered my cardiac arrest. Gavin stood over me and watched me collapse. He left me there to die. Audrey is the only innocent person in this family. She must stop him. His eyes fluttered, the massive effort of speaking completely depleting his remaining energy. I lowered the phone, saving the video file directly to my local encrypted drive and securing the device deep in my pocket. I leaned down, pressing my forehead against his frail hand. "I have it, Grandpa," I whispered, hot tears finally breaking through my cold, calculated exterior. "I have the proof. I am going to end this tonight, I promise you." A faint, peaceful smile spread across his pale lips. He looked at me, a profound sense of relief washing over his tired features. "I know you will," he murmured softly. "You always had the strongest spine in this family." His grip on my fingers slowly went slack. The rhythmic, steady beeping of the heart monitor abruptly flatlined, shifting into a continuous, piercing tone. The medical team rushed into the room seconds later, shouting orders and pushing past me with a defibrillator, but I already knew it was over. Theodore Preston was gone. I backed away from the bed, letting the nurses do their jobs. My chest physically ached with a suffocating grief, but a burning, white-hot rage rapidly overtook the sorrow. I had the ultimate weapon resting right in my pocket. I had the dying declaration of the family patriarch explicitly detailing felony assault, forgery, and financial conspiracy. I just needed to get back to my secure federal terminal to upload the file to the master evidence server. I pushed through the heavy wooden doors of the ICU and marched down the sterile corridor. The elevators were crowded with shift workers and visiting families. I did not have the patience to wait or the desire to be surrounded by people. I pushed open the heavy metal door to the emergency stairwell, the thick concrete walls instantly cutting off the noise of the hospital. I took 2 steps down the landing. A massive, heavy hand clamped violently over my mouth from behind, yanking my head backward. A thick forearm wrapped around my throat, choking off my scream. I thrashed wildly, driving my elbow backward into my attacker's ribs, but the man was entirely too prepared. He shoved me brutally against the rough cinderblock wall. The impact knocked the wind completely out of my lungs. My vision blurred as I slumped to the cold concrete floor, gasping desperately for air. Gavin stood over me, his face twisted into a vicious, predatory snarl. He breathed heavily, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit. "Did you really think you were the only one keeping tabs on the old man, Audrey?" He mocked, his eyes darting directly to my coat pocket. "The private night nurse on this floor has been on my payroll since the day he was admitted. She texted me the exact second he woke up." Before I could scramble to my feet, Gavin lunged forward. He pinned my shoulders to the concrete with his knees and aggressively patted me down. I fought him, kicking and clawing at his face, but the sheer weight difference made it impossible to break his hold. He shoved his hand into my trench coat pocket and ripped out my smartphone. "Give that back," I choked out, lunging for his arm. "Doubt." Gavin easily batted me away, swiping his thumb across the screen. He used my own face, currently staring up at him in terror, to bypass the biometric lock. He navigated straight to the photo gallery. I watched in absolute horror as his thumb hovered over the video file I had just recorded. He hit delete. Then he opened the deleted folder and permanently erased it from the drive. Gavin tossed the phone onto the concrete landing. He raised his heavy leather boot and brought his heel down with sickening force. The glass screen shattered into 1,000 useless fragments. The internal circuitry crunched and sparked, completely destroying the hardware. He stepped back, looking down at the ruined device, and then at me. He let out a loud, echoing laugh that chilled me to my core. "Good luck proving any of it now, federal agent," he sneered, turning his back and casually walking down the stairs, whistling a cheerful tune as he left me trapped in the freezing stairwell. The concrete floor of the hospital stairwell was freezing against my palms as I slowly pushed myself up. My breath echoed in the empty space, mingling with the sharp metallic tang of blood from a scraped knuckle. Gavin had smashed my phone into 1,000 useless fragments of glass and plastic, completely destroying the localized encrypted drive containing Grandpa Theodore's dying declaration. He walked away whistling, absolutely convinced he had won. He believed that without that video, without my family's backing, and without Theodore, I was completely powerless. He thought I was just a disgraced, disowned daughter crying in the dark. I did not scream. I did not chase him. I stood up, dusted off my coat, and left the shattered pieces of hardware exactly where they lay. Gavin fundamentally misunderstood how federal investigations worked. He thought like a thug, relying on physical intimidation and destroyed evidence. I thought like a forensic auditor. I did not need a video confession to bury him. I already had the offshore routing numbers, the fake charity ledgers, and the flight manifest to Montenegro. What I needed right now was for Gavin and Nia to feel completely, utterly invincible. I needed them arrogant. I needed them sloppy. For the next 3 days, I completely disappeared from their radar. I did not return my parents' angry voicemails. I did not show up at the estate to argue. I became a ghost. The morning of Grandpa Theodore's funeral was bitterly cold, accompanied by a relentless driving rain that turned the manicured grounds of the Preston family plot into a sea of gray mud. I arrived late and parked far away from the procession of luxury black town cars. I wore a plain, unadorned black trench coat and kept my umbrella pulled low over my face. I positioned myself at the absolute back of the grieving crowd, standing behind a row of tall granite headstones. I kept my head down, my shoulders slumped, and my hands shoved deep into my pockets. To anyone watching, I was the picture of total defeat. Gavin and Nia stood at the very front right beside the polished mahogany casket. They were putting on a masterclass in performative grief. Nia wore a custom-tailored midnight black silk morning gown that easily cost $20,000, complete with a dramatic lace veil that obscured her face just enough to look tragically elegant. She held a lace handkerchief, dabbing delicately at completely dry eyes. Gavin stood beside her in a bespoke razor-sharp Tom Ford suit, holding her elbow with practiced masculine support. They had purchased their entire mourning wardrobe using the exact charity funds they had stolen from dying children and desperate families. My parents, Richard and Catherine, flanked them on either side, completely ignoring my existence at the back of the crowd. Catherine occasionally reached out to stroke Gavin's arm, her face a mask of devastated aristocratic sorrow. They had chosen their golden boy completely blind to the fact that his hands were metaphorically covered in Theodore's blood. As the heavy rain drummed against the sea of black umbrellas, Gavin stepped up to the podium placed beside the open grave. He adjusted the microphone, looking out over the crowd of 500 elite donors, business partners, and politicians. My grandfather was a titan of industry. Gavin projected his voice thick with manufactured emotion. He taught me everything I know about business, about loyalty, and about protecting the Preston family legacy. His sudden passing has left an unimaginable void in our hearts. But Theodore would not want us to stand here weeping in the rain. He would want us to celebrate everything he built. Gavin paused, sweeping his gaze across the crowd. He briefly locked eyes with me, standing in the shadows at the back. A tiny, vicious smirk played at the corner of his mouth. He thought I was broken. Therefore, Gavin continued, turning his attention back to the wealthy crowd. Nia and I have decided to honor his final wishes. Tonight, we are hosting a massive celebration of life event at the Grand Plaza Hotel. We have rented the entire penthouse ballroom. I want all of you there. We will raise a glass to Theodore Preston, and we will ensure that the future of this family remains brighter and stronger than ever before. The crowd murmured in polite, somber agreement. I kept my head lowered, hiding the cold, predatory smile spreading across my own face. Gavin was entirely predictable. The celebration of life was not a memorial. It was a massive, chaotic smokescreen. Nia needed to transfer the final $2.5 million into her untraceable accounts before boarding her chartered Gulfstream jet to Montenegro at 11 o'clock tonight. A massive party filled with 500 drinking guests, loud music, and distracted security provided the absolute perfect cover for her to slip away, initiate the final wire transfers from her encrypted laptop, and drive straight to the private airstrip. She was going to leave Gavin standing in the middle of his own party, completely oblivious, holding the bag for the cartel debt and the federal fraud charges. The priest concluded the ceremony and the crowd began to slowly disperse toward their waiting vehicles. I did not linger. I turned my back on my family, walking briskly through the wet grass and out the wrought iron gates of the cemetery. I walked 3 blocks down the street, turning into a desolate, rain-swept industrial alleyway. A massive, unmarked black surveillance van was parked idling in the shadows next to a chain-link fence. I knocked twice on the heavy steel rear door. It immediately slid open from the inside. I climbed into the back of the van, shaking the freezing rain from my coat. The interior was lined from floor to ceiling with glowing tactical monitors, encrypted communication relays, and federal tracking equipment. 5 heavily armed agents from the IRS Criminal Investigation Strike Team sat waiting in the dim blue light, wearing tactical vests bearing the federal insignia. Sitting nervously in the corner, clutching a leather briefcase to his chest and sweating profusely despite the air conditioning, was Mr. Mitchell, the regional bank manager for Apex Global. He looked absolutely terrified. "You have the routing intercepts ready, Mitchell?" I asked, my voice snapping through the quiet van with absolute authority. He swallowed hard, nodding frantically. "Yes, Agent Wilson. The second she initiates the final wire transfer from the hotel penthouse, my servers will flag the transaction. We have a direct backdoor into her shadow accounts. The money will not leave the country." I turned to the strike team commander, a seasoned veteran named Miller. "The primary target is boarding a private jet at 11, I stated, pulling up the architectural blueprints of the Grand Plaza Hotel on the main tactical monitor. She will attempt to initiate the transfer during the height of the party, likely from the private VIP suite on the top floor. We let her initiate the wire to prove intent. The second Mitchell intercepts the funds, we move in. We lock down the entire hotel, we block all the exits, and we arrest Nia and Gavin Preston in front of 500 of their closest friends." Miller nodded, racking the slide of his tactical rifle with a sharp metallic clack. "We are fully armed and holding on your signal, Audrey. The trap is set." I stared at the glowing blueprint of the hotel on the monitor, the cold satisfaction finally settling completely over my mind. Gavin wanted to celebrate the Preston family legacy. Tonight he was going to watch it burn to the ground. The glowing monitors bathed the cramped interior of the surveillance van in a stark clinical light. I leaned over the central aluminum console, my eyes locked on the digital clock, pulsing in the corner of the primary tactical screen. It was exactly 11 in the morning. We had precisely 12 hours before Nia Preston stepped onto that chartered Gulfstream jet and vanished into a non-extradition paradise with millions of stolen charity dollars. I tapped the main keyboard, bringing up the architectural schematics for the Grand Plaza Hotel. The penthouse ballroom expanded across the screen in a complex web of ventilation shafts, service elevators, and restricted VIP corridors. "Miller," I said, turning to the strike team commander, "I need your absolute best operatives embedded on the floor before the catering company even arrives to set the tables. We cannot afford a single perimeter breach tonight. Nia is operating on a razor-thin timeline, and if she senses even a fraction of a threat, she will abandon the transfer and bolt." Miller stepped forward, his tactical gear rustling quietly as his eyes scanned the digital blueprints. "Consider it done, Audrey. I have 2 undercover agents securing the loading dock as valets. They will monitor every incoming vehicle, establish a secure perimeter, and control the primary choke point at the underground parking garage. I am putting 3 more operatives directly inside the ballroom dressed as waitstaff. They will carry concealed communications and have direct visual contact with the primary targets at all times." I nodded, pointing to a secluded room situated just behind the main stage on the schematic. "Nia is going to need a quiet, secure location to initiate a multi-million-dollar offshore wire transfer. She cannot do it from her phone in the middle of a crowded dance floor with poor reception. She will use the VIP bridal suite. I want the hotel audio-visual crew swapped out for our federal surveillance technicians. We need hidden cameras wired directly into the ceiling of that suite by 4 o'clock this afternoon. I want high-definition eyes on her laptop the absolute second she opens it. I pivoted my attention to the sweating bank manager huddled in the corner of the van. Mr. Mitchell clutched his leather briefcase so tightly, his knuckles were completely white. I walked over and placed a firm, uncompromising hand on his trembling shoulder. Mitchell, your role in this operation is the most critical piece of the entire puzzle, I stated, locking my gaze with his terrified eyes. Apex Global has been facilitating this cartel money laundering scheme for months under your direct supervision. You are staring down the barrel of 20 years in a federal penitentiary for financial conspiracy. But if you execute this intercept flawlessly tonight, I will personally guarantee your immunity deal with the Department of Justice. Mitchell swallowed hard, a bead of sweat rolling down his cheek as he nodded frantically. Tell me exactly what you need me to do, Agent Wilson. I will do anything. Nia is going to attempt to wire $2.5 million from her shadow account to the aviation charter company, I explained, tapping the financial routing codes on the monitor to emphasize the target. She is going to do it right around 10 o'clock tonight, giving the funds exactly 1 hour to clear international escrow before she boards her flight at 11. You are going to sit at a secure terminal at federal headquarters. The absolute second you see that wire transfer initiate in the Apex Global server, you are going to digitally intercept it. You want me to freeze the account? Mitchell asked, wiping his slick forehead with a trembling hand. No, I corrected sharply. If you freeze the account, her banking application will send an immediate error notification. She will know we are on to her, and she will run before we can lock down the building. I need you to create a mirror sequence. You are going to approve the transfer on her end, so her laptop shows a successful confirmation screen. But you are going to reroute the actual capital directly into a federal holding account. I need Nia to feel completely victorious. I need her to pack up her laptop and walk out of that VIP suite, believing she has successfully stolen the money. Mitchell took a deep breath and nodded rapidly. I can write a bypass script to mirror the confirmation page. It will hold the funds in a shadow ledger on the bank back end. She will never know the money did not leave the country until it is far too late. I looked around the van, meeting the eyes of every heavily armed agent in the confined space. Gavin is hosting this massive celebration of life to glorify the Preston legacy. Let him talk. Let him boast to the wealthy elite and play the grieving grandson. We do not make a single move until Nia initiates that wire transfer. The financial crime is the lock, and that digital signature is the key. Once Mitchell confirms the money is sitting safely in our federal holding account, I will give the signal. We collapse the perimeter. We block the elevators. We arrest them both simultaneously in front of 500 people. I raised my left arm, pulling back the sleeve of my stained trench coat to expose my watch. Synchronize, I commanded. Miller and his strike team raised their wrists in strict unison. Mitchell fumbled with his digital watch, tapping the side until it matched the glowing federal clock on the main console. The operation goes live at exactly 2000 hours, I announced, dropping my arm. Do not engage until I give the explicit order. Keep your comms clear and your eyes open. The tense, highly focused silence of the surveillance van was suddenly shattered by a harsh, vibrating buzz. It was not coming from the federal monitors or the communication relays. It was coming from the evidence table right behind me. I turned around. The burner phone I had confiscated from the Apex Global courier earlier in my investigation was lighting up. I picked up the cheap plastic device. A new message alert blinked aggressively on the cracked digital screen. I swiped the message open. My blood turned completely to ice. It was a grainy, poorly lit photograph. Richard and Catherine were tied to heavy wooden chairs in what looked like a damp, unfinished basement. Thick silver duct tape covered their mouths, their eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated terror. A massive, heavily tattooed man in a dark suit stood directly behind them, pressing the cold steel barrel of a suppressed handgun against the back of my father's head. A text message popped up immediately beneath the terrifying image. Your brother owes us $3 million. He has until midnight tonight to deliver the cash to the shipping docks. If the debt is not settled, your parents pay the balance with their lives. Do not call the cops. We are watching. I stared at the screen, my breath catching painfully in my throat. My parents had chosen Gavin over me just hours ago. They had called me a jealous liar and thrown me out into the street. Gavin had promised them he was fixing the problem. He had lied. The cartel had completely bypassed the bank foreclosures and went straight for blood. The tactical strike plan I had just spent the last hour perfecting was suddenly entirely useless. If I arrested Gavin and Nia at the hotel, the loan sharks would not get their money, and they would execute my parents without a single second of hesitation. I was completely out of time, and the rules of engagement had just violently changed. I stared at the burner phone, my mind racing through a dozen different tactical protocols, all of which would inevitably end with my parents dead. The IRS strike team sitting in the van with me was equipped for financial raids, not cartel hostage extractions. If I alerted the local police or called in a federal SWAT unit, the loan sharks would execute Richard and Catherine before the negotiators even arrived. The cartel wanted $3 million by midnight. I looked up at the glowing surveillance monitors displaying the blueprints of the Grand Plaza Hotel. Nia was currently upstairs in the penthouse suite attempting to wire exactly that amount of stolen charity funds to her private offshore account. I turned to Mitchell, the terrified bank manager, my voice deadly calm and stripped of all hesitation. Change the intercept protocol I ordered. Do not route Nia's wire transfer to the federal holding account. When she initiates the transfer, I want you to intercept the funds and push exactly $3 million directly to the offshore routing number the loan sharks just provided. Mitchell turned completely white, his hands shaking violently over his keyboard. Agent Wilson, I cannot do that, he stammered. Rerouting seized assets to an active criminal syndicate is a direct violation of every banking regulation in existence. I will go to federal prison. Agent Miller stepped forward, his hand resting heavily on his tactical vest. Audrey, he warned, his voice low and serious. We are crossing a massive line here. We are supposed to be securing evidence, not paying off cartel debt. I turned to face him, my eyes locked dead onto his. This is no longer just a financial fraud case, Miller. This is an active hostage situation. Gavin borrowed money from violent criminals, and now they have my parents locked in a basement with a gun to their heads. If we do not pay that debt right now, they die tonight. I am authorizing the transfer under emergency federal asset seizure protocols to preserve human life. Mitchell, you have my absolute guarantee of federal immunity. Do it. Now. Mitchell swallowed hard, his fingers flying across the encrypted keyboard as he hastily rewrote the banking script. The new routing sequence is locked in, he confirmed, his voice trembling. The second Nia hits, send the cartel gets their money. Excellent, I replied, turning toward the heavy steel doors of the surveillance van. Hold the perimeter. Do not let a single person out of that hotel. I stepped out into the freezing rain and unbuttoned my drab, oversized trench coat, letting it fall into a puddle on the asphalt. Underneath, I was not wearing my standard invisible federal field gear. I had prepared for this exact moment for weeks. I was wearing a stunning, sharply tailored crimson suit. The cut was bold, powerful, and completely unapologetic. I smoothed the lapels, feeling the heavy fabric settle perfectly against my shoulders. For my entire life, I had played the quiet, mousy, defeated sister. I had let them diminish me, ignore me, and cast me aside. That version of Audrey Preston was dead. I walked confidently through the rain, pushed open the massive brass doors of the Grand Plaza Hotel, and stepped into the bustling lobby. I bypassed the elevators and took the grand marble staircase, my heels clicking with a sharp, rhythmic authority against the stone. The penthouse ballroom was an absolute spectacle of stolen wealth and grotesque vanity. Huge crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over 500 of the city's most elite politicians, business tycoons, and socialites. Waiters in pristine white jackets circulated with silver trays of champagne and expensive caviar. A classical string quartet played softly in the corner. At the center of it all, standing on a raised mahogany stage, was Gavin. He held a crystal flute of champagne, basking in the glow of his manufactured success. He looked incredibly smug, wearing his bespoke morning suit, fully believing he had secured the entire Preston empire and eliminated me from the board completely. He raised his glass, preparing to deliver the final triumphant toast to his own brilliance. I pushed open the heavy double doors and strode directly into the center of the ballroom. The vibrant crimson of my suit cut through the sea of somber black morning clothes like a physical blade. I did not hesitate. I walked with absolute purpose, my head held high, commanding the space entirely. The reaction was instantaneous. The polite murmurs of conversation abruptly died. The string quartet faltered, the cellist missing a note as they stopped playing entirely. A dead, suffocating silence crashed over the massive room as 500 wealthy guests turned to stare at the woman in red crashing the funeral reception. Gavin froze mid-toast on the stage. His crystal glass hovered inches from his lips. The smug satisfaction instantly drained from his face, replaced by a sudden volatile fury. He slammed his champagne flute down onto the podium, the glass shattering sharply against the wood. He marched down the stage steps and stormed straight toward me, his face turning an ugly, dangerous shade of purple. "Get her out of here!" Gavin screamed, his voice cracking with rage as he pointed a trembling finger directly at my chest. "Security. Get your hands on her right now. Arrest her for trespassing. She has absolutely no right to be in this building." Two large private security guards started to move toward me from the edges of the ballroom. I did not flinch. I stood my ground perfectly still in the center of the crowd, completely unbothered by his screaming. I waited until the guards were exactly 5 feet away, ensuring every single person in the room was hanging on my next move. I slowly raised both of my hands in a gesture of mock surrender. I offered Gavin a cold, clinical smile that made him stop dead in his tracks. "Go ahead, arrest me," I said loudly, my voice projecting clearly to the very back of the silent, echoing ballroom. "But you might want to hear this voicemail first." Gavin's face contorted from shock into absolute unrestrained panic. The smug facade he had worn on the mahogany stage melted away in an instant, leaving only the desperate cornered animal underneath. He did not wait for the private hotel security guards to navigate through the dense crowd and reach me. He lunged across the polished oak dance floor, his hands outstretched, aiming directly for the microphone I had pulled from my pocket. "Stop her!" he screamed, his voice cracking wildly as he pointed at me. "Turn off the sound system! Get her out of here right now!" Before he could take another step, 3 waiters carrying silver trays of champagne suddenly dropped their cargo. The crystal flutes shattered against the hardwood floor, creating a sharp, violent crash that made several guests shriek and jump back. The waiters did not flinch or apologize. They moved with terrifying synchronized military precision, stepping directly into Gavin's path. These were not hospitality workers hired for the evening. These were Miller's elite IRS criminal investigation strike team operatives. They formed an impenetrable muscular wall of tailored white jackets and concealed body armor between my brother and me. One of the agents casually placed a heavy hand squarely in the center of Gavin's chest, shoving him backward with enough force to make him stumble into a high-top cocktail table. "Do not touch him yet," I commanded, my voice carrying cleanly and effortlessly across the dead-silent ballroom. "Let him stand there and listen to his own legacy." I turned my back on him and walked straight to the professional DJ booth set up near the edge of the grand stage. The hired sound engineer took one look at the federal badge I flashed, raised his hands in immediate surrender, and backed quickly away from the complex mixing board. I pulled a specialized heavy-duty IRS decryption drive from my jacket. It was a solid-state block of black metal specifically designed by federal tech divisions to bypass commercial encryption and interface directly with local audio hardware. I plugged the auxiliary cable directly into the master soundboard, keyed my federal access credentials into the small touchscreen, and routed the output to the main amplifiers. "You thought you were so incredibly clever in that freezing hospital stairwell, Gavin," I said, speaking clearly into the main microphone, letting my voice wash over the sea of horrified wealthy guests. "You thought physically smashing my phone under your boot would destroy Grandpa Theodore's dying declaration. You thought primitive violence could erase a digital footprint. But you fundamentally failed to understand how a federal forensic audit operates. I did not need that video to bury you. When the Bureau seized the master servers at Apex Global this afternoon, we did not just freeze your illicit offshore accounts. We ran a deep-level extraction and pulled the deleted communication logs. Gavin went completely pale. The vibrant color drained from his face, leaving him looking like an absolute ghost, standing in a bespoke suit. He looked frantically toward the exits, searching for an escape route, but two more undercover valets had already moved into position, firmly blocking the main double doors. I hit the playback button on the decryption drive. A short, sharp burst of digital static hissed through the massive overhead speakers, followed immediately by a voice. It was crisp, clear, and undeniably Gavin's. "Listen to me very carefully." The recorded voice of my brother boomed through the ballroom, reverberating against the crystal chandeliers. "I do not care how you do it. Just get the offshore account set up by tomorrow morning. Theodore is getting suspicious about the charity ledgers. I need that $3 million transferred out to the Caymans before he calls his lawyers and initiates an audit." A collective audible gasp ripped through the crowd of 500 elite donors. These were the exact politicians, business leaders, and socialites who had written massive tax-deductible checks to the Preston Family Charity, completely believing they were funding pediatric cancer research. Now, they were standing in formal wear, listening to the golden boy of the Preston Empire explicitly orchestrating the theft of their money. The recording clicked automatically, cutting to a second recovered voicemail. This one was frantic, breathless, and laced with absolute chilling malice. "The old man is dead!" The recording of Gavin snarled, his voice echoing violently across the room. "I took care of it. I shoved him hard against the heavy bookshelf in his study and forced his hand to sign the amended will. He went into cardiac arrest right there on the floor. I watched him drop. The entire estate is mine now, and if Audrey tries to stop the wire transfer, I will handle her too. I slapped her across the face last night and she took it like an absolute coward. She has absolutely no proof of anything. I am completely untouchable." The audio file clicked off, leaving a ringing, suffocating silence in its wake. The impact of his own words hit the room like a physical shockwave. Several prominent politicians who had been laughing and drinking champagne with Gavin just minutes earlier actually took physical steps backward, putting immediate distance between themselves and a confessed murderer. Women covered their mouths in sheer horror. Men stared in absolute disgusted disbelief. My parents, Richard and Catherine, stood frozen near the front of the stage, their faces contorted in sheer, unadulterated terror, as the reality of their blind loyalty finally caught up to them. They had protected and enabled a monster, and now the entire world knew it. Gavin was shaking violently. The carefully crafted illusion of the grieving, responsible grandson was completely shattered, leaving nothing behind but a pathetic, exposed criminal. The walls were rapidly closing in on him. He spun around wildly, his panicked eyes searching the devastated crowd until they locked onto the one person he thought was his partner in this entire sickening conspiracy. "Nia," Gavin pleaded, his voice breaking into a desperate, high-pitched whine. "Nia, tell them. Tell them it is taken out of context. Tell them we were just moving the money to protect the Foundation's assets. You know the truth. Tell them." He reached out his trembling hand toward her, seeking the ultimate validation from the woman who had helped him orchestrate every single stolen dollar. Nia stood perfectly still in her $20,000 black silk morning gown. She looked at Gavin's outstretched hand, then looked at the furious, judging faces of the 500 wealthy socialites surrounding them. The calculation in her eyes was instantaneous, cold, and absolutely ruthless. She realized the ship was sinking rapidly, the federal trap had sprung, and she had no intention of going down with the captain. Nia let out a sudden piercing sob. She brought her hands to her face, her shoulders shaking with violent, highly theatrical tears. She took a massive, dramatic step away from Gavin, treating him like he was suddenly infected with a deadly disease. "Do not come near me!" Nia screamed, her voice echoing with perfect manufactured terror. "Stay away from me, Gavin. You forced me to do those wire transfers. You told me you would hurt me if I did not help you hide the charity funds. I had absolutely no idea you killed Theodore. You are a monster. I was terrified for my life." Gavin stood completely paralyzed in the center of the ballroom, his jaw dropping open in sheer, uncomprehending disbelief. The ultimate betrayer had just been betrayed by the only person he trusted. The federal trap had slammed completely shut, and there was absolutely nowhere left for him to run. A sharp, genuinely amused laugh escaped my lips, cutting through Nia's theatrical sobbing like a jagged piece of glass. The sound echoed across the silent ballroom, drawing every terrified eye back to me. "You really missed your calling in Hollywood, Nia," I said, my voice projecting with absolute authority. "But you can save the victim performance for the federal prosecutor." I reached into the pocket of my crimson suit and pulled out a small encrypted remote. I pressed a single silver button. Instantly, the massive high-definition projection screens flanking the main stage flickered. The towering, somber memorial portraits of my grandfather vanished. In their place, a series of brightly lit, highly classified documents illuminated the ballroom. "Let us take a look at the terrified, innocent wife," I announced, gesturing to the left screen. This is a direct mirror of Nia's private offshore ledger, hidden behind 3 layers of corporate shell companies. Notice the sole authorized signatory on these accounts. It is not Gavin. It is exclusively Nia. Gavin snapped his head toward the screen, his eyes widening as he stared at the financial routing codes. I clicked the remote again. A new document flashed onto the right screen. "This is a confirmed flight itinerary." I continued, my voice relentless. "A private Gulfstream jet chartered through a shadow corporation scheduled to depart our local airfield at exactly 2300 hours tonight. The destination is a luxury compound in a country with absolutely no extradition treaty with the United States. Notice the passenger manifest. There is only 1 seat booked. Nia was never planning to take you with her, Gavin." The blood completely drained from Gavin's face. His mouth opened and closed silently as he looked from the undeniable proof on the screen to the woman he had married. "And finally," I said, delivering the absolute killing blow. I clicked the remote one last time. A scanned medical file from Apex Global's executive insurance database appeared on the screens. The tragic high-risk pregnancy that kept you both so terribly stressed and provided the perfect excuse for your erratic behavior. Medical records confirm Nia underwent a voluntary tubal ligation 5 years ago. There is no baby. There was never a baby. A shockwave of disgusted murmurs rippled through the elite crowd. Nia dropped her hands from her face. Her fake tears vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, calculating glare. The game was up and she knew it. Gavin stood perfectly still for 3 agonizing seconds as the absolute magnitude of his wife's betrayal crashed over him. He had murdered his own grandfather. He had stolen millions. He had taken on massive, lethal debt from violent criminals. And he had done it all for a woman who was actively setting him up to take the entire fall while she vanished into a tropical paradise with the cash. A guttural, animalistic roar ripped from Gavin's throat. His hands curled into violent fists as he lunged across the stage directly at Nia. Before he could even close the distance, a deafening crash shook the entire foundation of the hotel. The massive, solid oak double doors at the back of the ballroom were violently kicked open, the wood splintering loudly against the marble walls. The crowd shrieked in sheer terror as a dozen heavily armed men stormed into the elegant space. They were not wearing tactical gear or security uniforms. They wore dark leather jackets and ruthless, unbothered expressions. The cartel loan sharks had bypassed the hotel security entirely. The massive, heavily tattooed enforcer I had seen in the hostage photograph marched straight down the center aisle. He dragged 2 people by the collars of their expensive mourning clothes. With a vicious shove, he hurled my parents, Richard and Catherine, onto the polished hardwood dance floor directly at Gavin's feet. My mother let out a sharp cry of pain as she hit the ground, her designer dress tearing against the wood. My father scrambled frantically, his face bruised and his eyes wide with absolute, unadulterated panic. The clock ran out. "Gavin!" The cartel boss barked, his rough voice silencing the entire room. He pulled a heavy matte black handgun from his jacket and racked the slide with a terrifying metallic clack. "The late penalties just kicked in. You owe us $20 million right now, or your parents die on this floor." Gavin fell to his knees, throwing his hands up defensively. "I have it," he begged, his voice cracking. The money is wiring right now. Naya has it. Nobody is wiring anything, I stated. The cartel boss whipped his head toward me, raising his weapon. I did not flinch. I reached smoothly inside the breast pocket of my crimson blazer and withdrew my solid gold shield. I held it high, the metal catching the light of the crystal chandeliers. I am Special Agent Audrey Wilson, Internal Revenue Service, Criminal Investigation Division. I announced, my voice carrying the absolute weight of the federal government. And this entire building is currently under federal seizure. I raised my left hand and snapped my fingers. The trap I had spent months building finally snapped shut. Ear-splitting sirens suddenly erupted from the streets directly below the hotel windows. The secondary service doors surrounding the ballroom burst open simultaneously. Dozens of heavily armored SWAT officers and tactical IRS agents flooded into the room, their boots pounding against the floor in perfect unison. Red laser sights crisscrossed the ballroom, painting the chests of the cartel enforcers. "Federal agents, drop your weapons! Get on the ground!" Agent Miller roared, racking his own assault rifle as his strike team instantly surrounded the loan sharks. Outgunned and completely surrounded, the cartel enforcers slowly lowered their weapons, dropping to their knees and lacing their hands behind their heads. Tactical officers moved in swiftly, kicking the guns away and securing the criminals with heavy zip ties. From the ranks of the federal agents, Mr. Mitchell, the terrified bank manager, stepped forward. He clutched a thick stack of legally binding financial documents in his trembling hands. He looked at Gavin, then turned to face me. "Agent Wilson Mitchell," said, his voice echoing in the quiet aftermath of the raid. "I have the confirmation ledgers right here. The wire transfer was completely intercepted. Every single cent Gavin and Nia attempted to steal has been seized by the federal government and routed directly back into the Charity Restitution Fund. The accounts are completely empty." Gavin collapsed fully onto the floor, pulling his knees to his chest as he began to sob uncontrollably. The golden boy was completely broken. Nia stood silently, her wrists already secured behind her back by a female tactical agent, her eyes staring blankly at the floor. On the polished dance floor, Richard and Catherine slowly pushed themselves up onto their hands and knees. Their expensive clothing was ruined, their faces stained with tears and terror. They looked at Gavin, the son they had worshipped, the son who had orchestrated murder and theft and nearly gotten them executed by a cartel. Then they slowly turned their heads and looked at me. They saw the powerful crimson suit. They saw the golden federal shield gleaming in my hand. They saw the heavily armed strike team waiting for my command. The realization hit them with crushing, absolute devastation. They were completely financially ruined. Their beloved son was going to federal prison for the rest of his life. And the daughter they had despised, ignored, and thrown out into the street was the only person standing between them and total destruction. My mother let out a pathetic, broken whimper. She reached out her trembling hand, her fingers scraping against the hardwood floor as she and my father began to slowly crawl across the ballroom directly toward my feet. "Audrey!" My father begged, his voice cracking with desperate, humiliating submission. "Please, please, protect us." My mother dragged her knees across the polished hardwood, her mourning gown leaving streaks of champagne in her wake. She lunged forward, her hands latching desperately onto the ankles of my crimson suit pants. Her manicured fingers dug into the fabric with a pathetic grip. "Audrey, please," she sobbed, her voice breaking into a wail that echoed across the silent ballroom. "We are your parents. You cannot let them do this to us. We will make it right. Please give us a second chance to be a family." I looked down at the woman who had spent 30 years making me feel invisible. I did not feel a single ounce of pity, anger, or sadness. I felt absolutely nothing. The icy calm radiating through my veins was absolute. I planted my feet firmly and took a sharp step backward, forcing her hands to slip off my ankles and hit the floor. "You made your choice when you threw my clothes down the stairs," I stated, my voice echoing with pure finality. "You chose your golden boy. Now you get to burn with him." I turned my back on her weeping form and looked toward the stage. Agent Miller had already yanked Gavin up from the floor by his collar. Gavin was no longer the arrogant prince of the Preston Empire. He was a blubbering, broken shell of a man, his chest heaving as the cold steel handcuffs ratcheted tightly around his wrists. "You have the right to remain silent," Miller growled, his voice carrying the heavy authority of the federal government. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Gavin could not even formulate a response, simply nodding his head in a pathetic motion as tears streamed down his face. Across the room, Nia was putting up a much different fight. Two female tactical officers had her pinned against a cocktail table, forcing her arms behind her back. Nia thrashed wildly, kicking out as she screamed a string of vile obscenities at Gavin, the agents, and finally at me. "I hope you rot, Audrey," she shrieked, her face contorted into an ugly, vicious mask. The officers did not flinch, simply locking the cuffs and dragging her kicking and screaming through the grand double doors of the ballroom. Richard attempted to stand, reaching out a shaking hand toward me, his fatherly instinct finally deciding to make an appearance decades too late. "Audrey, you have to stop this," he commanded, trying to summon a shred of his former authority. "We are innocent in this. We did not know about the murder or the cartel." Before I could even respond, a senior detective from the Financial Crimes Task Force stepped directly into my father's path. Richard and Catherine Preston, the detective announced, pulling two pairs of handcuffs from his tactical belt. "You are both under arrest for conspiracy and acting as accessories to federal fraud." My father blinked in total confusion. "Fraud?" he stammered, stepping back. "We did nothing. We just signed the loan guarantor documents Gavin asked us to sign." The detective shook his head. "You knowingly signed documents leveraging federal charity assets as collateral for an illegal private loan. That makes you fully complicit in a massive financial fraud scheme. Turn around and put your hands behind your backs." My mother let out a blood-curdling scream as the detective grabbed her wrists. My father collapsed against the nearest wall, his eyes wide with absolute disbelief as the cold metal locked around his own wrists. They were shoved toward the exits, paraded through the crowd of horrified socialites and business elites who would ensure the Preston name was completely obliterated by morning. The tactical teams cleared the room swiftly, escorting the cartel enforcers, my disgraced brother, his treacherous wife, and my ruined parents out into the waiting fleet of armored federal vehicles. The remaining guests were quietly directed toward the secondary exits by uniformed officers, leaving their unfinished drinks and shattered illusions behind. Within 20 minutes, the opulent ballroom was entirely empty. I stood alone in the center of the vast space, the crystal chandeliers casting long, quiet shadows across the hardwood floor. The heavy, suffocating weight that had pressed down on my chest for my entire life was completely gone. The toxic roots of my family tree had been ripped from the earth, and the soil was finally ready for something new to grow. I took a deep, cleansing breath of the quiet air, turned on my heel, and walked out of the Grand Plaza Hotel. 6 months later, the bright summer sun washed over the pristine brick facade of the newly constructed Theodore Preston Community Center. I stood in the sunlit foyer, surrounded by the joyful noise of children playing and staff members organizing weekly programs. I had used the recovered funds from Grandpa Theodore's legitimate estate to build a foundation dedicated exclusively to helping victims of financial abuse and corporate fraud. I was no longer the invisible sister hiding in the shadows. I was the executive director, respected, powerful, and surrounded by true friends and supportive colleagues who valued my brilliance and work ethic. In the background, a television mounted on the wall played the midday local news broadcast. I paused, holding a stack of pristine financial ledgers, and watched the screen. The anchor's face was serious as a courtroom sketch appeared behind her. Former socialites, Gavin and Nia Preston, were sentenced today to 20 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole, the anchor announced. The sentencing brings a final close to the shocking charity fraud scandal that brought down the entire Preston empire. I smiled, a warm expression that reached my eyes. I picked up the remote and turned off the television, letting it fade to black. The past was completely buried. I tucked the ledgers under my right arm, pushed open the doors, and walked into the warm, bright sunshine. The revenge was complete, precise, and wonderfully sweet.